Welcome back to ScholarScoop. I'm Steve Loflin. I have a question for you. What does the traditional path look like? High school, college, career? Pretty straightforward, right? But wonder if your journey doesn't fit neatly into that mold, or you're considering changing directions entirely. Today, I'm joined by a great friend and longtime NSCS supporter, Jeff Sommer. His story is a powerful reminder that success can, and often does, come from unexpected places. Jeff built an impressive career with major companies like Deloitte, UBS, MetLife, and Pfizer, and now he's the founder and managing partner of his own consulting firm, Nexus-OD. But his career didn't start in corporate offices. It actually didn't even start on a college campus. It began in construction and waiting tables, a path that was driven by curiosity, adaptability, and meaningful relationships. In this conversation, we talk about what it means to embrace a nonlinear path, the immense value of mentorship, and why giving back is essential to a fulfilling career and life. Let's dive in and get some scholar scoop. Hey there, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining me today for a little bit of scholar scoop. I've been looking forward to this. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to see you, Steve. Happy summer,
Thank
almost.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always good to see you. And, I was thinking about this before we get on the call. Must have been what, like maybe 15 years ago or something that we were first introduced and
Yes.
you joined the board for NSCS.
Yeah.
Has it been that long?
It has, Steve.
Oh my gosh. Well, I can tell you when I think back on NSCS and sort of how we've evolved, one of the things that I constantly think about in evaluating our history is your coming onto the board was such an important part of a trajectory where we had the ability to start thinking a lot more creatively about how we got things done.
Mm.
And I don't know if that would necessarily be how you define yourself as someone that can go into a company or an organization and force it to be doing things differently or looking at things differently. But you brought so much of a breath of fresh air to the conversation and gave me so much permission to do it differently. You can do that differently. And so I think maybe it'd be fun just to talk for a few minutes about maybe your kind of career journey on one hand, but let's start with your education journey, because I know you have a little bit of an interesting story about your making a decision about college and what that looked like. So let's start there, and then we could talk about how you
Sure.
inspire people to think differently within companies and organizations.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. It's good to be here, and hello to all of your viewers. Um, I guess in a way I'd call it non-traditional, but I don't think that's really the case as I meet people and I work with people and understand their journeys. But I was not a spectacular high school student, much more involved in sports. Always loved school. And right out of high school, I went into working construction. I'm from a family with a number of contractors. And that led into working in some managerial roles in restaurants and really with some success there, not hitting a wall, but realizing there was more that I wanted to do and more I wanted to accomplish. And that pointed to going to university. And that was really a personal choice that I made. I'm the first person in my immediate family that's graduated um, university. And, really, I waited tables to get through school and some grants and things like that back at the time and a few scholarships over the years, that type of thing. So a non-traditional pathway. And I can tell you that I absolutely loved every minute of it. And I got a lot out of it and did well because I think I was focused. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you think it would have been different had you just gone right to college without having those other experiences that maybe helped you appreciate it differently?
I suspect it would be, but there's so much diversity in people's life experience. I know a number of colleagues or friends that grew up in privilege financially, and their college was paid for, and they did exceptionally well at university, and they're doing great things now. I think it just depends on. I think the secret ingredient is you're doing something that you're interested in that gets you out of bed in the morning, that gets you through the moments of I don't think I can get all of this done. Just when it's just you just push through it and get it done. And I'm sure a lot of people who have recently graduated had that experience walking up to the podium and getting the diploma and just like, wow, it's over.
Right, right.
I actually did it. So I think doing what you love goes a long way.
Well, I think what I'm seeing right now in high school students, especially, is they're
Mm,
starting to rethink the value of college or trying to
mm,
decide if college is absolutely necessary for the things that they are interested in. And I think to your point, you can have interest in things that would get you out of the bed in the morning that maybe don't necessarily require a college degree. And I think I've seen this happen too, where that's maybe what a person thinks, but then they go and start working in that space. And then they come to the conclusion, um, I think I do want to go to college. And I think I do want to take that next step for education. But it just doesn't happen sometimes on the same path. There are those people that you graduate from high school and the next step is you're going to go to college. And
right.
it doesn't have to work that way for someone to have a successful, happy life.
Yeah.
Sounds like your story has something to say that that's absolutely true, right?
Yeah. I think it was, 3 or 4 years out of high school, then I started taking community college classes at night and then, moved into a university, a Jesuit university in Seattle University. And it's interesting because I've seen those articles, and
Mhm.
that's out there. And a lot of times issues get kind of simplified and, people aren't seeing the value of going to college. I think, my experience was it was not just the acquisition of knowledge and the rigor of study and learning, which was, as core. It was also in the environment I was in. It was very um, conversational, and the professors really challenged our thinking.
Mhm.
And it wasn't about having the right answer. It's like, how did you get to that answer? And how do you think that answer will apply in these certain environments? So it's really challenging that way, but also community. I mean, there's a social part of it. I was at a stage of life and I was in a university. It wasn't a big drinking college or something like that I think gets overplayed a lot. But the community that I was a part of there, is still with me today, and I'm still connected with those colleagues and friends. And that was so. It's not just the learnedness; it's also the community and just being a part of something like that. That also I think was as impactful to me in terms of how I was developing at that point in my life.
Well, that's like music to my ears because I do think the college experience brings so much to the entire experience than just what you get out of the classroom.
Mhm.
And I think it's also important in that story that even if you don't go directly to college, you can still come into the community and you can still find the people that will make your experience overall connected in positive ways. So
Sure.
I know a lot of parents worry about that. If my student takes a gap year, or if my student actually does something first and then goes to college,
Mm.
they're going to miss out on meeting students. And I've read, and I think it's true in a lot of cases. If you do go to school right after high school, if you go to college, normally the people that you meet during your like first 6 weeks of your freshman year are typically the people that are your main core of friends throughout your college experience. You'll meet other
Yes.
people, but it's just the people that you meet right away. But the right away doesn't have to happen right after you get to college after high school. The
Great.
right away could be a few years later, and you'll meet some people that probably will be a part of your overall college experience. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And I love that you're still connected to people. I think that's also a big part of the overall college experience.
I'm
Um,
grinning because I'm thinking of one person in particular that I'm still connected with, and it was day two in
mhm.
as a psych major, statistics 101, and she was sitting right behind me, and she leans into me. I've never met her before, and she asked me, "Do you understand anything he's saying?" And she became my favorite study buddy. And we ended up having a study group and trying to figure out statistics. And a number of us ended up tutoring statistics and kind of falling in love with it just because of the logic behind it.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's exactly how it happened. It was 2 days in, and she became one of my longest friends from university.
I rarely hear anyone that says they love statistics, so that's
Yeah,
really
I do.
that's something really good to know about you, Jeff
Yeah,
Sommer.
sorry about that.
Um, we could probably spend a whole conversation sometime talking about the whole Jesuit education experience.
Yeah,
I
it's great.
spent a couple of years or so working at Georgetown, and not knowing much about the Jesuit
Yep.
learning environment, I just like fell in love with it and thought it was such an amazing experience for the students that get to have that.
Yeah,
So it's nice to know that you had a good experience with that at
it's
Seattle.
fantastic. Yeah.
Definitely. So when you graduated and you finished, where did you go next? Like, what did you do to start off your career beyond college?
So, psych major, realized that I didn't want direct application of the skill set in any kind of therapeutic setting. I probably don't possess that level of patience and listening skills, maybe sometimes. So, got very interested in organizational psychology and started in a healthcare organization, working my way through the various ranks of human resources at a time where that institution was acquiring a lot of independent medical practices with as managed care was kind of coming into play. So had the opportunity to work in what I would call organization development, helping acquire and integrate these new practices into the larger organization. So did that for about 7 years. That's where I started.
So is that anything you would have ever imagined that you would be doing when you walked onto campus the first day?
Oh,
Did
no,
that?
no.
No.
I didn't, I never felt stressed by what am I going to do with all of this. One of my other favorite classes as a psych major was anatomy and physiology, and there's two levels to it. And, it surprised me, my interest in it. It was just a challenge to remember all the skeletal and the muscular systems and parts. So no, it's not what I expected. And then what followed that, I certainly didn't expect. Moving from Seattle to New York, joining Deloitte, was at Deloitte in the management consulting part of the firm for nearly 14 years. I left as a partner and soon founded my own management consulting practice based in New York City, which is where I still partner with my colleagues. So we've been at that for about 16 years, focused on, as you mentioned earlier, working with companies and nonprofit organizations to develop their capabilities across a number of areas, including their priorities, their organization design, and talent management practices.
And I know that you're highly sought after for all of that, which is, I think, speaks volumes to what your capabilities are in helping companies and company leaders be successful in what they do. I think about what you said, though, a second ago with the idea that you took a course and it wasn't something you necessarily thought that you would be that interested in. And it
Mhm.
became something that was pretty important to helping you think about things. And I see so often that college students go through the process of taking the classes that they're required to take in order to get their major. And they don't give themselves permission to step outside a little bit and take something that's just totally kind of odd, particularly if you're looking at your
Sure.
portfolio of classes. And I can't tell you the number of times where I've heard people say, I took this class, it didn't make a lot of sense for what my major was, but
Mhm.
because I took the class, it really helped me think about some things really differently. And I think it's something that more and more students should just try to elbow their way into doing, even if their academic advisor is kind of like, you got to take these classes in order to hit your degree mark.
Yeah.
Find those classes that can really complement whatever you're
Mhm.
taking in your major, or in some cases, even double major, which is another way maybe to think about, I'm going to dabble in something else that might help me along the way.
Sure.
So that's great. You took that class and it was something that introduced you to something that led you to your first job, which then took you to so many other different places.
I've been in the workforce for a pretty long time now. And, on a regular basis, I'm sure you do as well, Steve. I engage with people that have accomplished a lot and they're not, they can be quite miserable in terms of their work. And I've always, back to that one point that of course you have to think about what your advisor is saying. That's what they're there for. And there are certain credits you have to take, and there's a sequence and there's a timing to it. And if you have parents or if you have student loans and things, you're balancing all of those things, right? There's a lot to consider. I think what you're suggesting is at the very least create a little bit of space for what fascinates you, what interests you, what problems do you like solving. I'm working with a colleague right now that comes from a bit of a similar background as mine, and a number of years ago got more involved in technology and is now doing a lot of he codes, and he's doing a lot of artificial intelligence work, what we would call um, designing and embedding AI agents in work process in companies to help accelerate things and all the things we're all aware of. But nobody told him that was the pathway. He just said, I'm interested in this. And he just kept reading about it and studying about it and getting involved in some groups and taking a project where he was really support and really built up his capabilities. So I'm a fan of at least carving out some time to explore what you're curious about.
And I think you have to make it a priority or it won't happen. You'll just kind of get into
Yeah.
the
Busy.
routine of what you're told, and
Mhm.
you miss out on some of those things. We have a lot of NSCS members, and I know students in general that think about the consulting companies for the next thing they want to do when they graduate. And I
Yeah.
think Deloitte is obviously one that comes up pretty often. And it's interesting to me that the way that Deloitte oftentimes handles recruiting is they have a few select universities that they put most of their time and effort into recruiting from. And I've always argued, as you know, that like there's amazing students all over the country that could take on these roles. But because of that, there's a lot of students that don't get exposed to what
Right.
is it to work for a consulting company because they don't show up on their campus and they're not really told much about it. How do you define those types of companies? Like, what's the opportunity there?
Mhm.
And what do you think are kind of the pros and cons of thinking about working for a large consulting firm?
I think consulting in itself, and there's various sizes. There's consultancy, Slalom Consulting, that's grown over the years in fairly recent time frame, and they've become very successful and highly sought after as well. I think on the very positive, advantageous side of consulting is the structure and the rigor that you go into, and consulting is a bit hierarchical. And when I entered as a manager, it was working through those levels over time and that type of thing. The hierarchy is not necessarily a bad thing because you're working with that next level up, and they really take ownership of developing you. In most situations, sometimes you might have to switch a practice because you're not getting that development. But I would say that as a generalization, that's true in consulting for sure. Yes, the paradigm is recruiting out of some of these larger out of some of the larger Ivy League schools. I'm not out of an Ivy League school. My pathway, which is one of many pathways, was to go get work experience that was specific enough, in my case, human resources and organization development, where I could go and find my way to a conversation with Deloitte's practice that does that type of work. I have not experienced consultancies to not be interested in variable talent. You look at Goldman Sachs' practice of hiring literature students and
Mhm.
philosophy students. They're looking for people that are analytical, can effectively process information, can come up with options, and have a compelling point of view based upon their kind of evaluation of a situation. So I think there's a number of ways. You're probably right, Steve, in terms of dropping your resume off, electronically or however, to a job fair type of setting. but there's a lot of other ways, and for sure, leverage your LinkedIn. Who are your friends that are at the consultancies? Who can you speak to? Final point. I think it's rare that professionals don't make the time to speak to somebody. Some leaders are just so busy, they just don't have the bandwidth. But you can find ways to have conversations with people and get involved in organizations related to what you're interested in. Go meet people, like
Mhm.
talk to people. It
Yeah.
helps.
Well, it also seems to me like the people that you worked with while you were at Deloitte and having become a partner at Deloitte, you venture into your next thing. You create a lot of like relationships and a network even through having that experience that probably sets you off on a better footing when you start your own company. Is that true for how yours worked?
Yeah. And then some no, because you bring this large consulting firm perspective to what you're doing, and you're in a startup mode, and there's a lot of differences to that. Absolutely, yes. And I think that the mentorship, um, I can't say enough about Deloitte as a firm. The leaders that I worked with throughout the course of my career there were just phenomenal people. I think about them all the time and what I learned from them. I worked with one leader who was leading one of the two leaders of tri-state, New York, Jersey, and Connecticut. And, so big role, a
Mhm.
lot of authority and accountability. And I remember feeling pretty good about something I had accomplished. I was working with him on something, and he picked the right moment and he said, Jeff, one of the things I've learned in my career, and this is somebody who's at the very top of the firm, like very top, highly respected. He said, I can't think of once that I ever accomplished anything on my own here at the firm. And what he was signaling to me was it's, it is about exactly what you described, the relationships that you build, the trust you build from being dependable and following through, and the type of capabilities you can bring together to solve problems. And isn't that more interesting than having the proverbial right answer? To be able to go to 2 to 3 people that you respect, you've been in some tough situations with, and say, here's the situation, here's how I'm thinking about it. Challenge me. What do you think? And that's, when you go back to the value of college, that didactic kind of, opportunity to debate and look around corners that you don't have the life experience, so you're not thinking of it that way, to get a richer perspective about how to solve a problem. That to me is, I never want to retire, because those are interesting conversations to have with people that you respect. So, um, yeah, you learn a lot from those people.
And I think that that can never be underestimated. And I think anyone going into their first job, maybe, or moving to their second or third company, you do leave a path behind you of the people that you've met and the things that you've learned. And I can just think of so many people that I've known throughout my whole career that I met them for the first time one time, right? And now we're here 40 years or so later, and
Yeah,
they're still in my life, right?
yeah,
And the
lovely.
thankfulness I have that I cross paths with people that have been such a part of the journey, but you don't know until you get into your roles and you start making it a priority to, I have to meet people. I love what you said, because it is, if you poll a couple of people, like, I'm struggling with this, or I'm dealing with this, I don't know how to handle it. What would you do? Or what would you advise me to do? It allows people to get involved in a way that they can see how they're helping you. But you have to have a little bit of vulnerability to do that, I think, because sometimes people are like, I don't want it to seem like I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't want to
Right,
ask the question in a way that's going to somehow make them think I don't know how to do a good job at this.
right.
And I
Yeah,
don't think that's generally the first place people go when you ask for help with something in the work environment. Is
yeah.
that true or false?
I that's my experience. I I think it can be where I go first in terms of my own fears and my own limiting beliefs, right? As you mentioned,
Hmm.
that thread of what one mentor reinforced for me and taught me in terms of don't go it alone. It's actually more fun not to go it alone. This one of the things we know in terms of management and leadership development is, organizations spend 80, 90% of their resources on you or I, in the first 2 or so years of our employment there. And then as we promote up through an organization, as if we stay there, it's pretty much, performance punishment. Steve did great on this. Let's give him this project, right? It is inevitable. And this is one of the things that, we don't learn about until it happens to us typically, but it's impossible to get year after year without, I'll call it a failure, which is probably faulty nomenclature. But when something doesn't go the way we intended it to, when we choke, one of my biggest failures was I choked at a speaking engagement. It was earlier on in my career, and it just took me so long to work through that. The way I worked through it was I had conversations with people I trusted. And one very senior person, she said to me, "Oh, I wish I had on tape my spectacular failures." Said it's not, yeah, you had a failure, but what defines who you are professionally is what you do now and how you show up and how you own it and learn from it. And friends and colleagues can help you through those conversations. You don't want to be sitting at home alone trying to work that through, because challenges occur in our professional lives. They happen. So it helps.
No, and that's definitely a good point to remember. And especially if you're just starting in a new job and you're just brand new at getting it all off the ground.
So much, right?
It's really, really important. So, so you had this good experience, you elevated your way to partner, you saw a path toward doing something that you could create your own company and you could help people in a different type of way. Did you go into your kind of career thinking that you were an entrepreneur, or is this something that you kind of pushed yourself to do a little later?
I grew up in a business family in Seattle. And my mom, in the 60s and 70s, started her own business, which women didn't do a lot of then.
Mhm.
So I had that example. So I grew up in that environment with, parents and grandparents that had built businesses. And that's just kind of the reality we lived in. So I guess it was in the water. It wasn't until I think I got to the point where I was ready to take that risk and try that out. Um, it surprised me a little bit. Brilliantly, I struck out on my own middle of '08 into '09 during the financial downturn, which retrospectively kind of ended up being a good thing because of the hustle,
Mhm.
because of the, sticking to this is the work we want to do. And this is how we want to do the work. And we have a strong perspective on this. And
Mhm.
so we just need to get out there and start talking to people. And we were, Steve, very fortunate over many, many years with a number of projects in multiple industries, from startup to, one project with a global professional services firm across 43 countries. So we've really had the opportunity to do a lot of great work. And what you said, I don't think it. The group of colleagues that I work with and the perspective that we bring is whether or not people agree with it. It's what we've learned works, and so
Mhm.
um, we're willing to enter into those tougher conversations with our clients. And I think that authenticity plays well. We're either a fit or not a fit for a company. We're not very bureaucratic.
I mean, I think that's the best kind of company that's not too bureaucratic. That makes everything more complicated, at least from my experience.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things that I've admired about what you do is how you like to commit to a nonprofit or a philanthropy that you share part of your profits with. What led you down that path to decide that that's how you wanted to run a company that was giving back?
I had the opportunity to do a pro bono project for um, um, Child Fund International, and working with a number of leaders there, including their HR leader at the time. And it was a leadership development program that CEO appointed, 12 to 15 high potentials globally, because they serve global. And it was the program had already been built, but facilitating that. But part of it was going into the market. Um, Part of it was going into the market and delivering the program with the leaders there, but also interfacing with children that were part of the program. And that work took us to multiple um, places in India, multiple countries in Africa, South America, the Dakotas here in the US. And it's a very personal story where two of us were invited into the home of a family in a slum in India, and they served us tea, and we realized that it was probably the last tea that they had. And we're sitting in their home, which they're very proud of, and dirt floors. And I think for me personally and professionally, it made me want to do something with what I've been given. And so that's what we do. We now contribute 100% of the equivalent of our profit to work we do with to nonprofit organizations or NGOs that serve children. And right now we're delivering work to a large global NGO and a smaller after school program in Harlem and something in between. So it's an interesting thing for us, Steve, because it provides us the opportunity for colleagues who work with us to find space to contribute to something that they care about and really pay their skills forward. Another reason why I think, gosh, if you got the shot to go build skills that are useful in the world and that people benefit from, that's another thing to consider if you're looking at the headlines that college isn't worth it.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that story. And I think as the current generation goes, and as students especially are looking for jobs, you hear more and more like, I want to work for some place that has a purpose, or I want to be a part of something that has a greater purpose than just delivering. And I think the more that companies do think about, like, we have this job that we need you to do, but we also, because you're doing that job, are going to be giving back or giving time off to do community service or travel to places to make an impact. I think more and more companies are trying to accommodate that
Yeah.
priority for the current generation. But it also reminds me too, it's back to what we were saying in the beginning. So much about where you take your priorities is based on where your experiences are, right? And if you commit yourself to being in places where you can experience all kinds of things, it's going to inform your priorities in a lot of ways. So
For sure.
being in India, obviously, if you had not been there, you would not have had that experience, and a lot of things could have unfolded differently. But what you did with that, I'm sure has made a difference for just so many people. So that's an incredible story.
Obviously, it's a personal and emotional one for us. We talk about it a lot, and it's just exciting when a colleague that we're working with has built up time in their bank and they get to go spend 2 weeks working with one of our pro bono clients. And final point is it's a gift. It's a privilege to be able to encapsulate some of these skills that wealthier organizations can afford. And you have a founder in Harlem, 4 years into a program that's just taking off, after school program for kids, and it's preparing them for university and college, and they're not getting that elsewhere. To be able to contribute to that it's a privilege. I mean, it's just a total gift to be able to do that professionally and personally.
That's amazing. Well, I know we don't have a ton more time, but I have one other thing that I would love for you to weigh in on for
Okay.
folks who are thinking about their future. I know that you do have a tendency to really push people to think about doing things a lot differently and not to stay the course just because it's always been that way. And that was certainly appreciated by me when you were on our board. Um, what's your take on the idea? Like, a lot of people want a job that's full of security, but they may have a tendency to want to try to do things differently. And I think I've read about it, like kind of entrepreneurship is the opportunity to maybe be in a large company and have an ability to create or do some things differently. Is that your philosophy generally, that you can be in a large place and still find your path to being able to create or do something that hasn't existed before?
Yeah, I worked with a woman at Deloitte. She joined after I was there. She came in as a global partner in the area of change management. Did tons of work in the automobile industry and lots of others. I'm not adequately representing her background, and helped with a number of the peace talks and all of this. She's just a phenomenal talent. And I had the opportunity to work with her. And I remember one night, it was just in the context of a project, we were grabbing a bite, and I said, tell me what's the one thing? Because she could enter into a room where there was lots of different perspectives, different agendas, and get people to the table to the root issue of what was being discussed, not all these symptomatic things. And I was in awe. I wanted to learn that skill set. And she said, easy, meet people where they're at. And she lived by that. And she paid attention to where Steve was at, where Jeff was at, where the next person was at. And she found a way to bridge that gap and create that discussion. So when thinking about whether or not you're going to go into, there's lots of different choices, right? Meet the organization where they're at. If you're going into a bank and, it's highly regulated and there's certain ways of doing work, there's different ways to be creative than if you're in a technology startup that's applying AI to resolving hunger. They're different environments. And I think, Steve, one of the things that, look, we all have to calibrate ourselves. And there's meetings I walk out of and I think, I didn't read the room, and I feel it. I didn't feel that connectivity with the client. So give it another shot. But really paying attention to the environment that you're in, knowing that probably you're not going to be in the same place your entire career. Some people are.
Right.
That wasn't my experience. But that's the skill as well, isn't it? Is understanding the environment you're in, understanding what matters most right now in that business or nonprofit, understanding the personalities and how things actually get done. And, I heard somebody describe it once as being a student of business. And so being a student of business only starts with college university preparation. It's a whole different set of next stages as you go into organizations. So don't be discouraged by it. Refine your approach to be effective in that environment. And if over time it's not the optimal environment for you, then that's a personal choice that you have to make. And that's your accountability. It's not the organization's.
I think that is super important to think about. And having had a lot of conversations with people recently about majors, I think you can be a student of business, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're a business major. And
For
I think
sure.
being a student of business is important regardless if you're liberal arts or any major you may choose. I think is something to keep in mind as you're making these choices about how to launch your career or rethink your career as you're maybe well into it. Those are some good things to think about. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I know how busy you are, and I appreciate you taking a little bit of time today to give us some incredible scholar scoop.
Yeah.
And I think we'll have to do this again sometime soon.
Appreciate it, Steve. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.